Panera Bread, or as we call it here in St. Louis, the St. Louis Bread Company, has just announced it's making a big change to its SIP Club, a subscription service that allows customers to pay a monthly or annual fee to be able to get free self-service drinks from Panera Bread locations as often as every 2 hours. This includes hot and iced drinks and fountain drinks, and people who frequent Panera Bread a lot tend to love this program, even if it sounds sort of silly to those of us who don't go to Panera Bread on a daily basis. Paying a fee of at least $120 a year to get free drinks means you've got to take advantage pretty much 2 or 3 times a month to cover your costs. And even then, you're only breaking even as a customer. But for those who have a Panera near their home or work or along their commute, this service can be valuable if they want to grab a coffee or tea and don't want to pay Starbucks prices for it. It's estimated that daily users might save up to $100 a month on beverages, so there is a market for this service. Unfortunately, it must not be a profitable market because Panera announced this week it's cutting back on the perks of its program starting in August. The main change is they're dropping the word unlimited from the service, restricting users to 30 self-service drinks per month or roughly 1 per day. Though Panera has not directly commented on why, users on internet forums have speculated it's due to people abusing the system by sharing their accounts or spending the day in the restaurants holding meetings or working on their laptops and then offering free beverages to their guests while not really spending any other money there. This problem falls in line with another restaurant business model that's really fallen out of favor in recent years, the all-you-can-eat buffet model. Now, there was a time when all-you-can-eat buffets were so commonplace that you could often find multiple choices in the same town. These days, you tend to mostly see them in more limited settings like Asian, Indian, Italian, or Mexican food restaurants. Breakfast buffets are still a staple in hotels, though they're growing less common over time, and lunch buffets tend to be most popular in busy areas where people don't have a lot of time to wait for table service during their lunch breaks. There's also the problem that buffets are not, and never have been, a very profitable way to run a restaurant. They can be enormously wasteful in terms of discarded food. They're generally regarded as being less sanitary and lower in quality than standard restaurants, and they tend to sit lower on customer satisfaction indices. And yet, they are still quite popular with some consumers, and so there's a market for them too. The question is whether or not it's a market that should be served. So let's take a look at buffets, and I promise I'm going to give you a heaping helping of history and knowledge here as we explore whether or not this business model still makes any sense in 2026, or if it ought to be something we leave to casinos, hotels, resorts, cruises, and college residence halls, while the rest of us just order whatever we want. I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this is the Marketing Gateway. The all-you-can-eat buffet is a pretty modern concept, actually, dating to the mid-20th century, and the idea is often credited to the older Swedish concept of a brandvinsbord, or table of spirits, which was provided as a pre-dinner hospitality measure for hungry guests to give them finger foods, Brandvin-style spiced vodka, and other alcoholic beverages. This eventually evolved into a smorgasbord, or spread of hot and cold food intended to serve as a meal rather than as a warm-up act to it. Then, in the 1930s, the United States was going through the Great Depression, and potluck-style buffets in homes became a popular way for large groups of people to eat together during a time when food was relatively scarce. The Chase Brass and Copper Company invented the electric coil buffet dish to help keep food warm and safer to eat, and enough people bought them that the idea of a buffet was ingrained in the American consciousness. But even so, the idea of a commercial buffet where you paid a flat fee to get an all-you-can-eat meal at a restaurant wasn't anything anyone would take seriously during a time of extreme poverty and food scarcity. That idea didn't really come around until after the Depression, when World War II was over and America was in the midst of its post-war boom. The story is that a publicist named Herb McDonald, no relation to the restaurant chain by the way, was familiar with a traditional Swedish smorgasbord offered at the Three Crowns restaurant in the Swedish Pavilion in the 1939 World's Fair in New York. He went to work in Las Vegas at the El Rancho Casino, and one night in 1946, when he was laying out the ingredients to make a sandwich, hungry gamblers approached to see if he was willing to share. This became the seed of the idea behind the Buckaroo Buffet, a 24-hour all-you-can-eat buffet where guests were encouraged to return to the serving line for more food if they wanted it. The cost? $1 a person, a true loss leader for the casino compared to the cost of the food, but a valuable service to keep guests well-fed and gambling. Of course, this story may be a bit too tidy to be exactly true. Other Vegas casinos also began offering buffets in the post-war era of the 1940s to lure in guests. But Buckaroo Buffet is generally regarded as the model for what began to spread across the United States over the next few decades. Even so, the buffet concept was mostly used in places with a high volume of customers and a reason for offering food using this high-cost model. Cruise ships and resorts, for example, became early eager adopters of the all-you-can-eat buffet, as did touristy restaurants in large cities and, of course, casinos outside of Las Vegas. But you also began to see chain restaurants gradually working their way into the buffet business, often starting by offering a salad bar for people to gather food while they waited for entrees like steak or pizza, and then gradually expanding to offer a greater assortment of hot and cold foods such as rolls, fried chicken, dessert items, and more. Chains like Sizzler, Western Sizzlin', Ponderosa, Bonanza, and Ryan's became synonymous with offering these partial salad bar buffets in the 1980s, and the chain Golden Corral pretty much perfected the full buffet formula in the 1990s. Around this time, buffets also started to become a popular way to reinvent Chinese family-run restaurants, which had fallen out of favor for offering the fine dining experiences they'd been associated with in the 1960s and 70s, and which were now trying to find ways to get customers dining in. Buffets proved to be a wonderful way to help customers who were unfamiliar with Chinese food and intimidated by the menus to be more willing to be adventurous and try things that simply look good on the buffet line. Other ethnic restaurants followed suit, though many would only offer buffets during the weekday lunch rush and return to ordering off a menu for dinner and weekends because the cost of running the buffets all day was just too high. And this is where we need to pause and talk about the economics of a restaurant for a moment. The biggest variable costs to a restaurant are going to be raw materials, food, packaging, and supplies, and labor. Margins on entrees are typically pretty thin, and thus restaurants either have to make up their costs in selling add-ons like appetizers, desserts, beverages, and alcohol, or by having such superior experience that they can charge more for it. Buffets run counter to this logic because consumers generally expect a fairly low cost for them and a wide variety of things to eat. This has everything to do with the loss leader roots of the business model in casinos and in tourism. Consumers expect buffets to be a relatively good value, and they'll put up with lower quality so long as the quantity makes up for it. So, buffets have to be run as a volume-based business, and they need to either try to fill diners up with cheap food so they don't expect the expensive stuff to be put out, or they need to find ways to turn a profit on customers who eat less than average to offset the costs of uneaten food. And you might think that people who overeat would seem like a threat to the buffet, but you know what? Since the restaurant controls how much food is brought out and which items are more or less available, overeaters tend to sort themselves out in a lot of these settings. It's actually the food waste that kills the profitability, whether it's a steam tray being dumped out because it's gotten old, or more likely, a customer who piled a bunch of food on their plate and then tossed most of it in the trash. Buffets will try strategies like upcharging on drinks or charging fees for uneaten food to offset these costs, but these are both unpopular policies that will send customers elsewhere. Often, they have to simply put up with the waste and can make up for it with cheaper items, narrow seating to increase their overall capacity, and limited service. And this is why you started to see buffets disappearing even before COVID-19, because they are horribly unprofitable when they're not running at peak capacity. They also tend to attract cheapskates who will avoid upcharges and try to maximize the challenge of seeing how much is truly all you can eat. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, there were a number of buffet chains owned by a company called Buffets Inc. that operated chains like Old Country Buffet, Hometown Buffet, and Buffet and Bakery that were primarily patronized by families with children and by the elderly. Despite being very successful in the 1990s during a growth phase, they couldn't find a path to long-term profitability even after they acquired Ryan's and then rebranded as Ovation Brands and then later as Vitanova Brands. They went through multiple Chapter 11s before the pandemic knocked them out of business for good. Marketing buffets is also tricky because they are pretty synonymous in consumer minds with families with kids and serving lower quality food. The market for this sort of restaurant tends to be the sorts of folks who want to go out for family meals, but who are on a tighter budget. This may be one reason why the buffet chains doing the best right now are pizza places like Pizza Ranch and Cici's, both of which survived the pandemic and which have strong roots in serving families affordably and in promoting Christian values. Buffets are also still viable options for breakfast and lunch, but primarily because they're fast and easy when time is limited. But as I mentioned, many hotel chains are scaling back on breakfast buffets because they find guests gravitate towards the more expensive packaged grab-and-go items and don't consume enough of the perishable food. And with food costs rising, they're increasingly a cost center for hotels that can't be easily offset by raising the room rates. And lunch buffets are suffering because of the broader issue that fewer people are working fully in offices these days. Remote work and hybrid schedules have hurt the business lunch sector pretty badly, and rising food prices combined with lower foot traffic have required cost-cutting and paring down menus and service options. Which brings us back to Panera's Sip Club, which is not a buffet itself, but designed around the same basic model of nearly unlimited consumption. Panera will certainly lose some subscribers as they tighten their policies to keep the service profitable, but they must feel that they won't lose enough to make a difference as they attempt to trim their costs. Now, personally, I don't see the value in cutting perks from a program that relatively few people are probably actually abusing, and which centers around self-service beverages, which don't cost a lot to provide and are the highest margin products a restaurant can offer. Treating the Sip Club as a loss leader to get people in the door all day, every day, seems like a stronger strategy than telling them there's a limit to how often you want to see them. And I'd wager that offering these invested and engaged subscribers deals on food to entice them to make purchases would generate greater profits than cutting out some free drinks. But I'll give Panera the benefit of the doubt here that they probably tried that and it didn't work. So unless they're ready to keep accepting losses on drinks, they're stuck policing the behavior of the customers who are taking advantage by having tighter policies to cut down on abuse. It makes sense, I guess, from a business point of view. But I'd hate to be on the marketing team responsible for making that change, because the one thing all-you-can-eat buffets have taught us about consumers is that when the perception of value is gone, the customers will vanish too. And it really stinks for Panera to see loyal customers departing over the cost of a few cups of coffee. Well, I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this has been the Marketing Gateway. See you next time. It's going to be a hot summer, folks, and this month's plug is to help out those who are struggling to beat the heat with indoor air conditioning, either because they can't afford to buy an AC or they can't afford the energy cost of running one. So I'm going to encourage you to donate to a group called Heat Up St. Louis to help them. I know, it sounds crazy, right? But that's because Heat Up St. Louis was originally founded to help people during the winter with their utility bills and to ensure that people are using safe methods of staying warm to reduce the potential for fires. So they also use the brand names Cool Down St. Louis and Cool Down Missouri in their mission to help people as well during the hot summer months. You can donate to them by visiting heatupstlouis.org or check out other ways to donate to them or even volunteer to help them out.